The storm above planet Arkan 7 was violent that night. Black clouds covered the sky while cold rain hit the metal buildings of the military base. Warning sirens screamed across the entire facility. Red emergency lights flashed through the dark halls. Soldiers ran in every direction. Some were carrying injured men. Others were trying to lock heavy security doors, but nothing was working. Something had escaped from Laboratory Sector 9, and everyone inside the base was terrified. Deep under the facility, smoke filled the broken laboratory halls. Burned wires sparked from the ceiling. Metal walls were twisted apart like paper. The air smelled like fire and melted steel. Bodies of destroyed security drones covered the floor. At the center of the destruction stood a small figure, a child. She looked no older than 8 years old. The girl had pale silver skin and glowing blue eyes. Her long white hair moved slowly, even though there was no wind. She was barefoot. Dirty hospital chains still hung from one of her small wrists. Blue energy moved around her body like soft lightning. Every few seconds the lights around her exploded. The little girl looked around in fear. She did not understand where she was, or why everyone was screaming. Outside the laboratory doors, 20 soldiers aimed their rifles at her. Their hands were shaking. Nobody wanted to enter the room, because they already saw what happened to the first team. Commander Elias Ward pushed through the crowd of soldiers. He was tall, calm, and carried a black military coat soaked by rain. A scar crossed one side of his face. Unlike the others, he was not panicking. What happened here? Elias asked. One scientist quickly stepped forward. His face was pale with fear. She escaped containment, the scientist whispered. She destroyed the security systems in seconds. Another loud explosion shook the hallway. Some soldiers stepped backward immediately. The little girl suddenly looked toward the open doors. For 1 second, her glowing eyes met Elias's eyes. The entire room became silent. The soldiers tightened their fingers on their weapons. But Elias noticed something strange. The child was not angry. She was afraid, very afraid. The girl slowly stepped backward as more armed soldiers appeared behind Elias. Blue energy started moving faster around her body. The metal floor began cracking under her feet. She's charging again. One soldier shouted, "Fire now!" But before anyone could shoot, Elias raised his hand. "Stand down," he ordered. The soldiers stared at him in shock. "Sir?" One of them said nervously, "That thing killed 12 men." Elias kept his eyes on the child. "No," he said quietly. She defended herself. The girl's breathing became faster. Tears slowly rolled down her face. Suddenly alarms exploded louder across the hallway. The frightened child covered her ears. At that exact moment, every light in the corridor shattered. A powerful wave of energy burst from her body. The soldiers were thrown backward violently. Smoke filled the air. People screamed, but Elias remained standing. He slowly walked forward through the smoke while everyone else tried to escape. The child looked at him with fear. She expected him to attack like the others. Instead, Elias removed his weapon belt and dropped it onto the floor. The soldiers behind him looked horrified. "Commander, get away from her." Someone shouted, but Elias ignored them. He slowly kneeled in front of the little girl. For a moment, the entire burning laboratory became quiet. Only the sound of fire could be heard. The child stared at him carefully. Her glowing blue eyes were shaking with fear. Then she spoke for the first time. Her voice was small and weak. "Please," she whispered, "don't let them hurt me again." Several soldiers froze in shock. The scientists looked confused. Nobody understood how she spoke perfect human language. According to the reports, she had never heard it before. Elias felt something heavy in his chest. This was not a monster. This was a terrified child. Slowly, Elias held out his hand. "You're safe now," he said quietly. The girl looked at his hand for several long seconds. Then, very carefully, she reached forward and grabbed it. The blue energy around her body slowly disappeared. For the first time that night, the alarms stopped. The room became silent. But far above the military base, hidden deep inside orbit, a dark alien warship watched everything. And inside that ship, one unknown figure smiled, because the most dangerous child in the galaxy had finally awakened. 3 days after the disaster inside Laboratory Sector 9, fear spread across the entire military planet. Every news station in the galaxy showed the same image again and again. A small alien child standing inside fire while armed soldiers aimed weapons at her. People called her many names: the Blue Ghost, the Starburn Weapon, the Child of Destruction. But inside the heavily guarded military base, the little girl sat alone in silence. The new containment room was different from the old laboratory. There were no chains, no metal experiment tables, no electric shock machines. Commander Elias Ward made sure of that. The room looked simple: a small bed, soft lights, a table with food, and one large window showing the rainy city outside. The child sat quietly near the corner of the room, with her knees against her chest. She still did not trust anyone. Every time a soldier walked past the door, her glowing blue eyes followed them nervously. The guards outside feared her too much to even look directly at her. Inside the control room nearby, military leaders argued loudly. She destroyed half the facility. One officer shouted, "She is too dangerous to keep alive." Another officer slammed his hand onto the table. "If the alien empires learn she exists, they will start a war." Elias stood silently near the wall. His face showed no emotion. Finally, one scientist spoke carefully. "There is something else." The room became quiet. The scientist activated a hologram screen. Security footage appeared in the air. The video showed the child during the experiment weeks earlier. She was strapped to a metal chair while scientists surrounded her. Electric machines were connected to her body. The little girl screamed in pain while blue energy exploded around the room. Several officers looked uncomfortable watching it. One older commander frowned. "You experimented on a child?" he asked coldly. The scientist lowered his head nervously. "We believed her species could become the ultimate military weapon." Elias's expression darkened immediately. "You tortured her," he said quietly. Nobody answered at that moment. Every screen inside the control room suddenly turned black. The lights flickered once. Then a small voice echoed through the speakers. "Please stop shouting." Everyone froze. The child was somehow inside the station systems again. Elias immediately left the room and walked toward her chamber, outside her door. Nervous guards stepped aside quickly. When Elias entered, he found the little girl sitting beside the window. Rain slowly moved down the glass behind her. She looked smaller somehow, not dangerous, just lonely. "You can hear us?" Elias asked softly. The child nodded slowly. "When people are loud," she whispered. "I hear thoughts too." Elias stayed silent for a moment. That explained many things. The fear, the panic, the violent reactions. She was not attacking people because she wanted to. She was overwhelmed. Elias slowly placed a tray of food onto the table nearby. The girl stared at it carefully. "You should eat," he said. She looked at him nervously. "Is it poisoned?" she asked quietly. The question hit Elias harder than expected. "No," he answered. "It's safe." The child slowly walked toward the table. Every movement was careful, like she expected pain at any moment. She picked up a piece of bread and looked at it curiously. Then she took a small bite, for the first time. Elias saw a tiny smile appear on her face. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. "What is your name?" Elias asked. The child looked confused. After a long silence, she shook her head. "I don't have one," she whispered. Elias frowned slightly. Everyone deserved a name, especially a child. Before he could answer, warning alarms suddenly exploded across the station again. The room lights turned red. A soldier's voice shouted through the speakers. "Unknown ship detected entering orbit." Inside the chamber, the little girl instantly froze. Fear filled her glowing eyes. Then something terrible happened. The air around her began shaking violently. Metal objects inside the room slowly started floating upward. Cracks spread across the walls. Outside, soldiers began shouting in panic. Elias immediately understood she was scared again, and her powers were reacting. The child covered her ears as tears filled her eyes. "They found me," she whispered in terror. The shaking became stronger. Across the entire military base, power systems started failing one after another. Lights exploded. Computers died. Security systems shut down completely. For 10 terrifying seconds, the entire planet lost power. Even the giant city outside disappeared into darkness. People across Arkan 7 stared into the black sky in fear. Then suddenly, everything returned. The lights came back, machines restarted. The shaking stopped. Inside the chamber, the little girl collapsed onto the floor crying softly. Elias quickly moved toward her. He carefully knelt beside her while the frightened child trembled. Outside the window, far above the planet, dark warships slowly appeared through the storm clouds. And for the first time in many years, the galaxy was preparing for war. The arrival of the alien warships changed everything on Arkan 7. Giant black ships now floated silently above the planet like dark shadows. People across the city stared at the sky in fear. Military checkpoints appeared on every street. News stations warned citizens to stay inside their homes. Nobody knew why the alien fleet had come. But inside the military base, everyone already knew the answer. They came for the child. Deep inside the secure containment sector, the little alien girl sat quietly beside the window again. Rain touched the glass softly while distant thunder shook the sky. The room was silent except for the sound of pencils moving across paper. Commander Elias Ward stopped outside her door and watched carefully. The child was drawing small stars, planets, and strange glowing symbols nobody understood. Elias slowly entered the room carrying a tray of food. This time the girl did not move away from him. That alone surprised the guards outside. 3 days earlier she barely allowed anyone near her. Now she looked at Elias differently, like she trusted him. "What are you drawing?" Elias asked calmly. The little girl looked down at the paper. "I don't know," she whispered. "My hands just remember them." Elias placed the tray on the table. The child looked at the food carefully before eating, still cautious, still afraid, but less than before. For several quiet moments, neither of them spoke. Then Elias finally said something important. "You need a name." The girl slowly looked up at him. "A name?" She repeated softly. Elias nodded. "Everyone deserves one." The child stayed silent for a long moment. Then she quietly asked, "How do humans choose names?" Elias almost smiled for the first time in days. "Sometimes names have meaning," he answered. "Sometimes people choose names for someone they care about." The little girl looked down again. Nobody had ever cared about her before. Elias thought for a moment. Then his eyes moved toward the stars she had drawn across the paper. "How about Lyra?" he asked. The child blinked slowly. "Lyra," she whispered softly, like she was testing the word for the first time. Then something small but beautiful happened. She smiled, a real smile this time, not forced, not afraid. "I like it," she said quietly. Outside the room, one guard stared through the glass in shock. "That thing is smiling," he whispered nervously. The other guard looked uncomfortable. "It still killed people," he muttered, inside the room. Lyra suddenly looked toward the door. Her smile disappeared immediately. Elias noticed. "You can hear them again?" he asked. Lyra nodded slowly. "They're scared of me," she whispered. Elias sat down across from her. "People fear what they don't understand," he said. Lyra looked confused. "Am I bad?" she asked quietly. The question hit Elias harder than any battlefield ever had. He looked at the frightened child sitting alone in the cold room. A child created as a weapon, feared by everyone, hated before she even understood why. And somehow she still worried about being good. "No," Elias answered firmly. "You are not bad." For a moment Lyra simply stared at him. Like nobody had ever said those words to her before. Suddenly warning alarms echoed through the hallway outside. Both guards grabbed their weapons immediately. A voice shouted through the speakers, "Security breach in Sector 4. Elias instantly stood up, but before he could move, the lights inside the room flickered once. Lyra's face changed. Fear returned to her eyes. "There's someone here," she whispered. Elias frowned. "What do you mean?" The child slowly looked toward the dark corner of the room. "He wants to kill me," she said softly. At that exact second, the ceiling vents exploded open. A black armored figure dropped silently into the chamber, an assassin. The stranger raised an energy weapon directly toward Lyra. The guards outside shouted in panic. Everything happened too fast. The assassin fired. Elias immediately jumped in front of Lyra, but before the blast could hit him, the entire room froze. The glowing energy shot stopped in midair. Floating motionless, blue light exploded around Lyra's body. The walls shook violently. The assassin looked terrified. Slowly, Lyra stood up. Her glowing eyes were brighter than ever before. "You were going to hurt him," she whispered. The air itself started bending around her. Metal objects lifted from the floor. The assassin tried to fire again, but suddenly his entire body lifted into the air, like an invisible hand grabbed him. He screamed in terror. Elias turned toward Lyra quickly. "Lyra, stop!" He shouted, but the frightened child could no longer control her emotions. Blue energy burst through the chamber. Glass shattered everywhere. Then suddenly, silence. The assassin's body dropped lifelessly onto the floor. Smoke slowly filled the room. Outside, soldiers stared through the broken doorway in complete horror. The assassin was dead, and the little alien girl stood frozen in fear beside Elias. Tears slowly rolled down her face. "I didn't mean to," she whispered weakly. Then, for the first time since her escape, Lyra looked truly terrified of herself. The assassin's death spread across the galaxy within hours. Every news station showed the same terrifying headline: "Alien child kills again." People no longer called Lyra a victim. Now they called her a threat. Across human space, fear turned into anger. Some demanded her execution. Others demanded Earth surrender her to the alien empires before war began. On Arkan 7, riots exploded through the lower city. Citizens filled the streets carrying signs and shouting in panic. "Protect humanity! Destroy the alien weapon!" Military drones flew above the crowds, while emergency sirens echoed through the night. But inside the underground medical wing of the military base, Lyra sat silently on a hospital bed. She had not spoken for almost 6 hours. Not since the assassin died. The room lights were dim. Rain touched the windows softly, and outside the door, armed guards watched her every movement nervously. Commander Elias Ward stood near the wall with tired eyes. A doctor quietly approached him. "She hasn't eaten anything," the doctor whispered. "She keeps asking the same question." Elias looked toward Lyra. "She is the reason we are about to be destroyed," someone shouted back. At that exact moment, power suddenly flickered again. The room temperature dropped. Everyone turned toward the entrance. Lyra stood there silently. She had heard everything. Fear and sadness filled her glowing blue eyes. "They want me," she whispered. Nobody answered. Several officers slowly stepped away from her. Like she was already dangerous enough to explode, Lyra looked toward Elias. "If I leave," she asked quietly, "will they stop hurting people?" The room stayed silent again. Because nobody truly knew the answer, Elias walked toward her slowly. "No," he said firmly. "They will never stop once they control you." Lyra lowered her head. For the first time, Elias saw guilt crushing her completely. Outside the base, massive explosions shook the city again. Enemy ships had started attacking military defenses. Screams echoed through distant streets. Then suddenly the entire building trembled violently. A nearby defense tower exploded outside the command center windows. Glass shattered everywhere. Soldiers rushed through the halls in panic. The planet was losing the battle quickly. One terrified officer grabbed Elias's arm. "We can't defend this place much longer," he warned. Elias looked toward Lyra, then toward the burning city outside. Finally, he made his decision. "We're leaving," he said. Several officers stared at him in shock. "You're helping her escape?" One shouted. Elias ignored them. He turned toward Lyra calmly. "Can you trust me?" he asked. The little girl looked frightened, but after everything, there was still only one person in the galaxy she trusted. Slowly, she nodded. Minutes later, alarms screamed across the military base as Elias led Lyra through dark emergency tunnels beneath the city. Far above them, warships filled the skies, and hidden deep inside one of those enemy ships, the alien leader watched their escape carefully. Cold night wind rushed through the streets of the outer colony. Broken neon signs flickered above old metal buildings. Smoke filled the air after days of bombing from enemy warships. People ran through narrow streets carrying bags, children, and whatever food they could save. Fear lived everywhere now. Commander Elias Ward moved carefully through the crowded alleyways while keeping Lyra close beside him. Both wore long dark coats to hide their faces, but hiding Lyra was becoming impossible. Too many people already knew her face. The child who could destroy worlds. They had spent 3 days escaping through poor colonies near the edge of Arkan 7. No military support, no safe place. Only ruins and frightened civilians still. Something strange happened during those days. Lyra kept helping people. When power systems failed inside apartment buildings, she repaired them quietly when hungry children cried. She secretly left food near their doors. When injured civilians could not move, she carried them to safety without using her powers. The colonists slowly began whispering different stories about her. Not monster, not weapon, but girl. One small boy even waved at her from a broken window earlier that morning. Lyra had looked shocked that someone was not afraid of her. Now Elias and Lyra hid inside an abandoned factory near the edge of the colony. Rain hit the rusted roof softly while distant explosions shook the ground. A small emergency radio played nearby. "The enemy fleet continues demanding surrender of the alien child known as Lyra," the reporter said nervously. "Military officials fear full planetary invasion within hours." Lyra quietly turned the radio off. The room became silent. Elias noticed her hands shaking again. "You should rest," he said. Lyra slowly shook her head. "People keep getting hurt because of me," she whispered. Elias walked closer. "This war started long before you," he answered calmly. "But they only came after I appeared," Lyra replied. Before Elias could answer, loud sirens suddenly echoed outside the factory. Then came screaming. Lots of screaming. Elias immediately grabbed his weapon and rushed toward the broken windows. His expression darkened instantly. Enemy dropships were descending into the colony streets. Hundreds of armored soldiers poured into the city like black metal insects. Civilians ran in panic while explosions destroyed nearby buildings. The invasion had begun inside the streets. Giant speakers echoed through the chaos. "Surrender the child, Lyra," an alien voice announced. "Resistance will result in total extermination." Lyra stepped beside Elias and watched the burning streets silently. Fear filled her glowing eyes. Then she saw something that froze her completely. A small group of children trapped beneath fallen metal beams. Enemy soldiers were moving toward them, quickly, without thinking. Lyra ran outside. "Lyra, wait!" Elias shouted, but she was already gone. Rain poured heavily across the streets as civilians screamed and scattered everywhere. The trapped children cried for help beneath the destroyed building. Enemy troops raised weapons toward them carelessly. Then suddenly, everything stopped. The rain itself froze in the air. Every soldier turned slowly in shock. Blue energy moved across the street like lightning. Lyra stood between the soldiers and the children. Her glowing eyes burned brighter than ever before. "Leave them alone," she whispered. One nervous alien commander lifted his weapon. "Fire!" He shouted. Hundreds of plasma shots exploded toward her at once. The colony disappeared inside light and smoke. People screamed. Elias ran forward desperately. But then the smoke cleared, and everyone froze. Every plasma blast hung motionless in the air around Lyra, like time itself had stopped. The invading soldiers stared in horror. The child slowly lifted one trembling hand, and suddenly the entire enemy army rose into the sky. Thousands of armored soldiers, vehicles, weapons, even dropships, everything floated helplessly above the colony. Civilians across the streets watched in complete shock. Nobody had ever seen power like this before. The enemy commander struggled helplessly in the air. "What are you?" he whispered fearfully. Tears rolled down Lyra's face as blue energy shook around her violently. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she whispered back. Then with one movement of her hand, every enemy weapon across the battlefield crushed into pieces instantly. Metal twisted like paper. Cannons exploded. Dropships fell lifelessly from the sky. But Lyra did not kill them. She only stopped them. The entire battlefield became silent. Even the enemy soldiers looked terrified now. Not because of destruction, but because a child with enough power to wipe out armies had chosen mercy instead. Far above the colony, inside the enemy flagship, alarms screamed across the command bridge. An officer stared at ancient records appearing on hologram screens. His face turned pale. He quickly looked toward the alien leader. "Commander," he whispered nervously, "we identified her species." The leader slowly turned. Fear appeared in his cold eyes for the first time. "That's impossible," he said quietly. The officer swallowed hard. "The records say their race vanished thousands of years ago." He looked back toward the image of Lyra standing in the ruined colony below. Then he whispered the words nobody wanted to hear. "She belongs to the Celestials," and across the galaxy, old legends were beginning to wake up. The name spread through the galaxy like fire. Celestials, an ancient race believed extinct for thousands of years. In hidden temples, forgotten libraries, and old military archives, people searched for answers. Every story about the Celestials ended the same way. Fear. Entire civilizations once worshipped them like gods. Others tried to destroy them. Because according to legend, Celestials could bend reality itself using emotion. Anger could destroy cities. Fear could stop hearts. Sadness could darken entire worlds. And love. Love was said to be the strongest power of all. Inside the hidden underground shelter beneath the outer colony, Elias stared silently at the old hologram recordings playing before him. Ancient alien symbols moved across the screen while damaged translations slowly appeared. Lyra sat nearby wrapped in a gray blanket. She looked exhausted after stopping the invasion army. Small sparks of blue energy still flickered around her hands whenever she became emotional. An older alien historian adjusted the hologram machine nervously. He had secretly contacted Elias after hearing about Lyra. His face looked pale with fear even now. "You don't understand what she truly is," the historian whispered. Elias looked at him coldly. "She is a child," he answered immediately. The historian shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "She is the last known Celestial." The hologram suddenly changed. An image of a glowing alien world appeared in the air. Beautiful cities floated above oceans of light. Thousands of silver-skinned beings walked peacefully beneath giant stars. Lyra stared at the image silently. Something deep inside her seemed to recognize it. This was their homeworld, the historian explained. The Celestials were peaceful once. The image suddenly changed again. Now the world was burning. Massive storms destroyed entire cities. The sky itself cracked apart with blue light. Millions died. Their emotions became too powerful, the historian continued sadly. One war destroyed their entire civilization. Lyra lowered her head slowly. So my people were monsters, she whispered. Elias immediately looked toward her. No, he said firmly. But they destroyed everything, Lyra replied quietly. The historian stayed silent because deep down he feared the same thing. Elias walked closer to Lyra calmly. What destroyed them wasn't power, he said. It was fear and hate. Lyra looked at him carefully. And what if I become like them? She whispered. Elias knelt beside her. Then I'll remind you who you are, he answered. For several seconds, Lyra simply stared at him, like she was trying to believe his words. Suddenly loud alarms echoed through the underground shelter. Everyone froze. A young resistance fighter rushed into the room, breathing heavily. They found us, he shouted. Enemy fleets are moving toward Earth now. The shelter became silent. The final attack had begun, hours later. Emergency broadcasts filled every screen across human space. Huge alien warships surrounded Earth. Cities prepared for evacuation. Military defenses activated across the planet. Humanity stood at the edge of extinction. Inside the shelter, resistance fighters loaded weapons while civilians cried nearby. Fear spread everywhere. But Lyra stood alone near the far corner of the room, watching Earth slowly rotate on a hologram map. Elias approached quietly. You should get some rest, he said. Lyra shook her head slowly. They're going to kill millions because of me, she whispered. Elias crossed his arms. They were looking for war long before they found you. But I can stop it, Lyra said softly. Something about her voice made Elias uneasy. He stepped closer. What are you thinking? He asked. Lyra stayed silent for several long seconds. Then finally she looked up at him. If I go to them alone, she whispered, maybe they'll leave humanity alone. Elias's expression hardened instantly. No, he answered. I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself. But people will die, Lyra replied. Not if we fight together, Elias said firmly. Lyra looked away again, for the first time since meeting her. Elias could not read her expression. Later that night, the underground shelter became quiet. Most civilians were asleep. Resistance fighters prepared weapons silently, and Elias finally rested for the first time in nearly 2 days. But when morning came, Lyra was gone. Elias woke instantly after hearing alarms and shouting outside. Several guards rushed through the shelter in panic. A transport ship had disappeared during the night. Elias ran toward the launch platform as fast as possible, but deep down he already knew. She had left. On the empty platform floor, one small device blinked quietly. A recorded message. Elias picked it up with shaking hands. Then Lyra's voice filled the silent hangar softly. Dad. Elias froze completely. It was the first time she had ever called him that. Thank you for teaching me how to be human, her voice continued quietly. I'm sorry for leaving without telling you. A long silence followed. Then came the words Elias feared most. If I stay, more people will die. The message ended. Far above the planet, hidden among the stars, one small ship moved alone toward the giant enemy fleet surrounding Earth. And inside that ship, a frightened little girl prepared to face an entire galaxy by herself. Earth's skies burned red that morning. Thousands of enemy warships surrounded the planet like dark giants. Massive defense cannons fired endlessly from the surface. Explosions lit the clouds while terrified civilians watched from below. Emergency alarms echoed through every major city. People believed this was the end of humanity. Inside the main enemy flagship, alien commanders prepared for the final attack. Huge hologram maps covered the command bridge. One officer stepped forward nervously. Human defenses are collapsing, he reported. We can begin planetary bombardment within the hour. The alien leader stood silently with his hands behind his back. Cold silver armor covered his body. Victory was only moments away. Then suddenly, every warning alarm on the ship exploded at once. The bridge lights flickered violently. An officer looked down at his control screen in shock. Unknown energy source detected. he shouted, before anyone could react. A bright blue light appeared outside the massive command windows. At first it looked like a distant star. Then the light grew larger, closer, until the entire fleet finally saw her. One small ship moving alone through thousands of warships. Inside that ship sat Lyra. Her small hands trembled slightly while stars reflected in her glowing eyes. She was afraid, very afraid. But this time she was not running anymore. Across every ship in the enemy fleet, terrified whispers spread quickly. The Celestial. She came alone. She's only a child. Back on Earth, military stations detected the strange energy too. Inside a damaged resistance command center, Elias stared at the radar screen silently. Then his eyes widened. "Lyra," he whispered, high above Earth. Enemy warships slowly surrounded her ship from every direction. Weapons charged, cannons aimed directly toward her. The alien leader finally appeared on a communication screen inside her cockpit. "You surrendered yourself," he said coldly. Lyra looked at him calmly. "I came to stop the war," she answered softly. The commander's expression darkened. "You are too dangerous to exist," he replied. Lyra lowered her eyes sadly. "I know," she whispered. For a brief moment, the commander almost looked uncertain. Then his face became cold again. "All ships prepare to fire," he ordered. Hundreds of weapons locked onto Lyra instantly. Inside her tiny ship, warning alarms screamed loudly. Fear filled her chest again. The same fear she felt inside the laboratory. The same fear that always made her powers lose control. Blue energy slowly moved around her hands. Outside, the fleet prepared for destruction. Then suddenly, a human voice echoed through her communication system. "Lyra." Her eyes widened instantly. "Dad?" she whispered, inside a stolen resistance fighter ship. Elias flew directly toward the enemy fleet at full speed. "You are not facing this alone," he said firmly. Lyra's eyes filled with tears immediately. "They'll destroy you," she whispered. "Then they'll have to destroy me first," Elias answered. For the first time since leaving the shelter, Lyra smiled softly. Outside, enemy weapons fired all at once. Thousands of plasma blasts rushed toward the small ships like a storm of light. Then time itself seemed to stop. Every weapon froze motionless in space. Every ship became trapped in invisible force. Blue light spread across the stars like waves in water. The entire battlefield fell silent. Millions watched the event live across the galaxy. Lyra slowly rose from her seat inside the ship. Her glowing eyes filled with tears. But there was no anger inside them, only pain and hope. The alien fleet commanders tried desperately to react, but none of their systems worked anymore. Weapons shut down. Engines died. Entire warships drifted helplessly through space. Yet Lyra did not destroy a single ship. She only stopped the war inside the flagship. Terrified officers stared at their powerless controls. The alien leader slowly stood from his chair. His hands trembled slightly for the first time in many years. "She could kill us all," one officer whispered. But Lyra's soft voice suddenly echoed across every ship in the galaxy. "I don't want revenge," she said quietly. "I just want everyone to stop being afraid." Back on Earth, civilians watched silently as the battle above them suddenly ended. No explosions, no death. Only silence among the stars. Elias finally reached Lyra's ship moments later. When the hatch opened, Lyra ran toward him immediately. Elias caught her tightly in his arms. For the first time since they met, the frightened child finally allowed herself to cry freely. "I thought I was a monster," she whispered through tears. Elias held her closer. "No," he answered softly. "You were just a child who needed someone to love her." Across the galaxy, millions heard those words live, and everything changed after that day. The war ended. Humans and aliens slowly began rebuilding together, and years later, on peaceful worlds filled with both human and alien children, people still told stories about the little celestial girl everyone once feared, but more importantly, they remembered the human who stood beside her when the entire galaxy wanted her gone, the human she proudly called Dad.